And tonight we're going to be talking to Tony Gosling. We've had a number of technical issues just to start off the show. And so that's just par for the course. Not sure why, because we've had some very good luck in the recent future with everything we've been doing, but apparently not today. So hopefully you can now see this banner on the screen here, and we're going to bring Tony on in just a moment here. So bear with me. And for some reason, the chat room seems to have stopped working. And that is a very strange thing, and we don't know why that is. But I am now back from Marrakesh, Morocco, where we were looking into doing a tour over there at some ancient sites and doing some research, and it was a lot of fun. Very fascinating country, I must say. And so we were able to get some cheap tickets over there from England. Now I'm on my way tomorrow back to the USA. So that's what's happening with Project Camelot. And now what I will do is bring Tony onto the screen here. And hopefully this will all go smoothly. Tony, welcome. Glad to have you here with us.
Hi.
So we want to cover a number of topics today, and I'd like you to give yourself a brief introduction since there may be some people who haven't seen our other broadcasts.
Sure. Well, my name's Tony Gosling. I do a program in Bristol every week, politics program for 2 hours, which is engaging politicians, the members of parliament, some of whom are very reluctant to come on the radio. Others are less reluctant. For example, the more hardcore Blairites in the Labour Party, like Kerry McCarthy, is a Bristol MP. She would hate to be called a Blairite, but actually I think that's one of the reasons she doesn't want to come on the radio, because she won't, sort of engage with that analysis of her. I mean, she was very almost vitriolic attacking Jeremy Corbyn during the leadership campaign with Owen Smith, and there's only one conclusion you can draw from someone who's calling their own party leader a cult leader, which is that they're not really very loyal to the membership of the party. So I think we've got that problem in the Labour Party. Also, some of the Tories don't want to come on, but we get a lot of councillors on, and we get a lot of analysis of what's going on in the city of Bristol. It's been fascinating to see what's happening, because the people may not realise, but by 2020, local government in Britain, it looks like will get no funding whatsoever from central government if this Conservative government gets its way, and they will have to raise all of the taxes that they spend in the regions from their own council tax. And they're now considering trying to raise council tax from people with no money. So politically, it's explosive, really. It means that we've got a similar sort of situation that we have in Spain and in Greece, and also in Ukraine, just before the Maidan protests, where people are paying their taxes, but most of those taxes are going to pay off debt from the banks. They're not actually being spent on local services or the things that people want them to be spent on. So we've got that happening in Bristol, and this is all under a Labour mayor. Marvin Rees is from Labour, and he was elected last year, but he seems to be far more draconian in taxing people with no money than anyone before. So that's what I do every week. My background is I was trained by the BBC in the early 1990s, worked at the biggest radio station in London at the time, which was Greater London Radio at Marylebone High Street, and we had a big team of researchers working on things like the IRA bomb attacks in the early 90s. I've also been involved in supporting squatters' rights, for example, empty buildings that are left empty for years. They're occupied by people. In fact, some of them, managed to stay there for a long time. So, but my main focus really is on doing something like you're doing, really, Kerry, which is because the mainstream concentrates all of its effort in London. All of the national and international news analysis is done from London, very little from anywhere else. And so what we're trying to do is to break that monopoly and that stranglehold on the news that the London media, I sometimes call them the mafia media, have brought about in this country, and it's meant that we're just not getting any depth of analysis. We're getting superficial reporting, and on all the key issues, really, the only way you can describe it is lies.
Yes, absolutely. Well, of course, we're having that dire situation in America at the moment, as well, as everyone knows, and actually really worldwide. I have to say, I wouldn't trust any country's news, to be honest with you. But what I want to do is really launch into these various topics. I know we're with limited time here today with you, Tony. So if you would just be so kind as to sort of jump into the first topic that you prefer to talk about.
Okay, I think maybe the biggest thing that is not being done properly by the mainstream press, I get people, Kerry, you probably do too, saying, oh, why didn't you talk about this? Actually, I don't often, it's quite often big news stories that we don't cover at all, because the mainstream press has done a reasonable job. And, you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are some good channels out there. Telly Sur English over in Venezuela is doing some fantastic stuff. Abby Martin, who used to be on RT, she's been doing I think it's called the Empire Report program on there. It's brilliant. It's really good. It's set up by Hugo Chavez, Telly Sur English, and it's done a brilliant job in Latin America in bursting the media monopoly bubble of the big corporate bankster-funded media.
Sure.
Also, of course, things like Press TV, Russia Today have actually made a bit of an impact. And I think it's fair to say that Al Jazeera, based in Qatar, is the reason that we've had this recent attack on Qatar in the Middle East from all of the Western powers saying, oh, Qatar's terrible, and particularly the Saudis really having a go at them, blockading the country, is because Al Jazeera is actually providing a bit of a different voice. And actually, there seems to me nowadays, look at what happened with Iraq and weapons of mass destruction. The mainstream media in the West is the spearhead of the war machine. These are where the lies begin.
Sure.
All this stuff about Gaddafi bombing his own people. This came from the media. It wasn't actually happening, but it was the excuse, and that's what they're using the media for. So I think the main thing to talk about, just, I'll run through some stuff if that's okay, is this Las Vegas attack, the Vegas attack.
Absolutely.
On the Strip, because the way it's been reported, okay, you've noticed probably that it was in the news pretty much for 5 or 6 days, and then it's kind of dropped off the media. Some unbelievable and amazing stuff came out in that. Probably the most fascinating was Brianna Hendricks, who was that young girl who did an interview with Sky, saying that these people were in the concert, thousands of people in that concert, but down the front of the concert, these people pushed their way to the front, these two Hispanics, and they were touching people's hair and kind of invading their personal space and acting really weird, saying, you're all going to die, you're all going to effing die. Now this, maybe that's fake, that interview. I don't think it is. It just has that ring of truth about it. This to me is a mafia fingerprint, a massive great mafia thumbprint on this attack. It's like saying, well, it's a bit like what the mafia do, is they come and they tell you that they threaten you before they murder you. This kind of attitude of, well, we're just going to have a bit of fun. It's almost like they're playing cat and mouse in such a horrific situation. So I think that's really important those people are traced. The fact that they're Hispanic means possibly it's links to the drugs trade. As we know, the Las Vegas was built by the mafia, for the mafia.
Sure.
The Las Vegas Police Department is probably used to having to deal with the mafia, and they may well understand privately what they're dealing with. It's very difficult for them to come out in public with that. But I think that the other major problem is with as we saw, I think it was last Thursday, the FBI, Kerry, started briefing against the local police. The local police were saying, we don't believe that Stephen Paddock acted alone. Immediately, the FBI come out and say, well, anyone can say that. That's just speculation. You can say anything. They're briefing against the local cops. Now, the local cops, they should allow to investigate this attack and find out who really did it. Because personally, I don't believe Stephen Paddock had any intention and was actually involved in any of the killing. It's quite obvious that there were other people in that room. Yes. There's the fairly hard evidence. There was a phone charger left in the room, which wasn't attached to any of the phones that he had. So somebody else was charging their phone in there, not Stephen Paddock. And also there was this amazing hour-long gap between the end of the machine gunning and the local police SWAT team actually bursting into the room. So there was an hour where all sorts of things could have happened. Shots were fired out of the room as well. So there were periods of time where there weren't police in the corridor outside. So I think it's pretty clear that and also there's another really, I think, fascinating, should we say, smoking gun. There's loads of smoking guns with this attack, but one of them is the Wendy Miller from KERRY, that's COOROY in Australia, who was reported in the Australian press as being in a nearby bar and saying that this security guard came sprinting, she says, out of the Mandalay Bay Hotel, and he was pursued by a load of other security guards who were shouting for him to stop, etc. Now, this looks to me as if it may have been the real shooter or one of the people involved in the attack in some way being pursued by security. But the interesting thing is, of course, if they're wearing a security gear, private security firm gear, then they are less likely to be arrested. It may be that they were in disguise. So, I mean, there are other bits and pieces to do with this. Mainly is, I mean, it's quite clear from this guy's profile, as a millionaire, everything to live for, all of the people surrounding him, his friends and his family and his girlfriend, have all said they don't think that he would do such a thing at all. It's not in his profile. Right. His next door neighbor, who's ex-Marine Corps, actually said that there was no way that he did it. He believed he was a patsy. I believe that. Yes, absolutely. And I think we have to start asking questions also of Rita Katz and the Site Intelligence website, as well as AMAC News Agency, who both reported this as an ISIS attack. Now, what that could mean is that the FBI are running kind of covert ISIS units of some sort. And as we know, much of what ISIS does is supported covertly by Western intelligence services and by Western private military companies. So I think we've got a link there to what was happening with this most horrific attack.
Absolutely. Well, I do agree with you. And of course, we have Jim Fetzer, Dr. Jim Fetzer, and Scott Bennett, and we've got Jim Stone. If you can go to my website, everyone who's listening, I've got a whole slew of great links and information, new stuff coming forward, actually every day. And today is no exception. Steve Wynn, as you may have heard, came forward saying they didn't have the proper security on the elevators, supposedly, so that the guns could be moved in and out. All kinds of really anomalous, crazy stuff. The Manchurian Candidate aspect of this is obvious, and
if you look at the reporting, if I can just interrupt, you look at the reporting that there's been, it's almost all been focused on him.
Yes,
right?
Always the way.
Well, you know, they want to know everything about him, his whole history. Although I haven't heard hardly anybody talking about his work for Lockheed Martin,
right?
Which is, of course, one of the reasons why the FBI may have recruited him, because obviously someone who's been in the middle of a major defense contractor is exactly the sort of person that the FBI would like to recruit to maybe do some kind of sting operation. So he thinks he's doing one thing, and then suddenly he finds himself surrounded by these nutters who want to machine gun people. Right. We also haven't got yet a time of death. I would suggest that he was probably shot and killed in that room, executed.
Well, actually, Jim Fetzer, I don't know if you heard this piece of information that said there's a pool of blood and there are shell casings on top of the blood, which means the shooting, he was supposed to be shooting after he was already dead. So, you know, you see that this is obviously showing
actually, look,
other
the big
shooters,
smoking gun with
other
the photos
shooters
of
were in
him
the room. Yes.
are that you've got his hands down by his sides, right? His legs down below him, obviously, kind of straight, as if he's kind of just laid out on a bed straight with his hands by his sides. And yet the gun is over here somewhere. Yeah. It's about 3 feet away. So I don't know what happened. Maybe there was an amazing recoil on the gun and it bounced off the floor, it bounced off the wall, and it bounced over to the other side of the room. Is that feasible?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's so many there are some literal smoking guns here, just so many of them. And I do plan to do another show, and you're certainly welcome to join whoever I can get who is looking into this, the researchers, the various people. But
I'd like to hear, really, I'd like to hear from the Las Vegas mafia. Actually,
sure.
I'd like, because they are a major force. And I think that they should be coming out and, first of all, condemning this, rather than hiding under a rock as they normally do. This is such an important attack in the city. They need to come out and they need to say, we had nothing to do with this. And also, we have these leads and we'd like to tell the public about it. Because if that doesn't happen, then I think we just have to come to the conclusion that since this is Mafia City, that the Mafia were involved. Also, going back to the claims of this being an ISIS attack, you know, this is beyond a joke. If this guy, Stephen Paddock, is working for ISIS, certainly they've even had the cheek, the chutzpah, to claim that he converted to Islam a few weeks ago.
Right, yeah.
Now, look, just a minute. This is nonsense. And, of course, all of his friends and family have said it's nonsense. But if this kind of rubbish is being peddled as truth by the mainstream press, you know, what Rita Katz has said, and she is the person that all the Western media go to find out if something's an ISIS attack or not. She said it's verified. She has 100% verified this statement from ISIS, right, from the Amaq news agency. Now,
who runs ISIS? You know, you have to look at who runs ISIS.
Every single attack that she has verified in the past, every single one, including the Manchester bombing here in Britain, and every other so-called ISIS-claimed attack. The other ones on Paris, for example, Brussels. All these attacks, I think somebody needs to really have a word with Rita Katz and say, look, if that was ISIS, then I'm the Queen of Sheba. Right,
absolutely. Fair enough. Tony, let's move on to Catalan, because Catalonia, there's a lot going on over there. I'd like to hear your opinion. I know, you know, being a sort of a European, quasi-European, as a Brit, being closer to the mark there, can you talk a little bit about your opinion on what's going on there?
Well, look, it's not so much my opinion, it's what the mainstream press has been totally leaving out in their coverage about the Catalan referendum. Yes, they've showed the violence, blah, blah, but they've left out this really important, and I will spell this for you, Gurtel. There's a scandal that's been rumbling on over in Spain since around about 2012, 2013, the Gürtel scandal. And as part of that scandal, what we've seen is a whole load of documents produced by the ruling party, what they call the People's Party, which, by the way, is Franco's party. Franco, when he died, the fascist dictator of Spain, who was responsible for the horrors of the Spanish Civil War, he died in 1975 and handed over power to King Juan Carlos. Juan Carlos a few years ago abdicated and handed over to Felipe. So we've got a direct succession from Franco to the current royal family in Spain, who, by the way, are Bilderbergers. I mean, that almost should go without saying. But this scandal has affected the same party as Franco's. That is to say, Rajoy's party and Bárcenas, who was their party treasurer. What they were doing was, I suppose, what fascists all over the world do, is they have quiet slush funds. So they're getting loads of money from industry. And in this case, in Spain, it was the construction industry. So these massive government buildings, all sorts of government construction contracts, roads, all these kinds of things. Every time the government awarded a construction contract to a particular company, they were getting millions of euros, and that was going into a Swiss bank account managed by the party, by Bárcenas, by the treasurer, and hundreds of thousands of pounds were being, I mean, I'm talking about 300, 400, 500 thousands of pounds were being paid into bank accounts of the People's Party cabinet, ruling cabinet government. Now, that court case has been rumbling on for a couple of years. The greatest and the best judges in Spain have been trying to nail these guys, but you know what's been happening? I suppose you can predict what I'm going to say now, is that the ruling party and King Felipe and King Juan Carlos have been maneuvering to get these judges removed. And so what you've got is you've got a judicial system where all of the best judges and all the most knowledgeable and the bravest judges have been one way or another kicked out from the courts. So they've done that to make sure that nobody goes to jail. Importantly, in this Gürtel scandal, 22 million euros in a Swiss bank account, just a slush fund to pay to anybody that wants to do with the party. Oh, here's $1 million, you know. this is totally and utterly criminal. They should all be in jail, but they're not. They're running the country. And that's why I think we've had these ridiculous decisions from the Constitutional Court saying that you can't have a referendum, you can't vote, that it's legal to send the police in. As Craig Murray, the former Uzbekistan ambassador, has pointed out, everything that they've been doing is is illegal under the European Convention of Fundamental Human Rights. So there's about 6 or 7 different cases of the articles of that charter that have been broken by the Spanish government, by the Spanish police, by wading in to beat up old ladies who are waiting to queue up to vote. The BBC reported this incredibly as protesters clashing with police. No, the police beating up and firing rubber bullets into voters, not protesters, voters.
Right.
Just trying to stop the vote. So I think we're going to see this rumbling on, and but the most appalling thing to come out of it is that many people who thought that it was a good idea to support the European Union for whatever reason, you know, the 48% in the Brexit vote, are now looking at this and saying, right, well, Brussels is supporting of fascists. What's going on here? And a lot of people have been repelled by that, Kerry. And I mean, I think Craig Murray's article he did last week is actually brilliant to see, well, look, here's someone he has supported the European Union most of his life. He's taken one look at what's happening in Catalonia. He said, never again.
Right. Right. Very interesting. Yes, there are definite, parallels with the whole Brexit thing, and more to come, I would imagine, in some other countries. But it's fascinating that Spain is heated up in quite this way.
Well, look, remember the Basque separatists too, right? They're right next door.
Right.
In a way, this is actually, although it's all about Catalonia, it's also about the Basque country, because the Basques are sitting there like this, watching what's happening over there. And of course, they are much more likely to have a similar kind of vote now.
Okay,
and
but let me throw something out.
They've given an example to the whole world of how the modern European governments behave, and they're in a way they're being very, very smart. They're testing people like Donald Tusk, right? People like Trump around the world, and let's see, are they going to support or not? And it's becoming clearer and clearer to everybody around the world. These people aren't interested in democracy. They're trying to create a police state. In Catalonia last weekend, they did create a police state. They had a police state, a fascist police state. It's not minced words. And that's actually, I think, at the back of all of this is slowly but surely it's becoming impossible for people not to see that that's what's going on at the top of power. You know, concentration of power in these most powerful maniacs, you know, whether back with his audience.
Okay.
He keeps them on live chat so that the people watching can constantly tell people like you and I, hey guys, the YouTube is cut out or whatever.
Yeah, YouTube got stuck. There's no reason for it. It's now operational again.
Yes.
So we were talking about the Basque people right when the audio cut out.
Okay.
So if you could reiterate that, and then we'll continue.
Yeah, because of course the ETA and the Basques have been trying to separate from Spain for decades, and it was an armed campaign, rather like the IRA campaign, to do that for many years, and that was all kind of agreed, quieted down. But the Basques should be watching very, very closely what's happening in Catalonia, and many other people around Europe. In Tyrol, in Austria, for example, they now have a secession movement. In Venice, in Italy, there's a secession movement there. So I think it's called the Liga del Norte, which is a bit kind of right wing, but whatever, it doesn't really seem to matter. You know, there are people now who are thinking, what's the point of paying our taxes to a government that is just simply going to use it to repay debt, and we don't see any services. You know, as I was saying earlier about what's happening in Bristol, you know, there's less and less services. They're saying now that they're basically just going to be a bureaucracy sitting there. They won't actually be providing services. But if people with no money don't pay them tax, they'll go to jail. I mean, it's starting to look a bit feudal, and it's a bit like the sort of, you know, Robin Hood, Sheriff of Nottingham style situation where, you know, you've got kind of tyrants around the country, you know, running things for a central government. But anyway, we really ought to talk about Cyril Smith, because he's been news today.
That's great. But before you go on to Cyril, I do want to ask you this question, Tony.
Sure.
Are you aware that there is an American base that's quite significant in Spain? And this separatist movement may be of great concern to the American military, and of course to Spain keeping any kind of relationship going. This is a jumping off point always for anything going on in the Middle East that the American government wants to be, you know, in on and able to launch, you know, their attacks from, and so forth. Are you aware of that?
Yeah, I mean, EUCOM, we're talking EUCOM, and I think most people, I don't know sure how many of your viewers understand that the United States now intends to dominate the world through its what's called unified command structure.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've got in Europe, we've got EUCOM. In South America, there's Southcom, and in the Middle East, there's what they call CENTCOM. There's a whole load of different command structures around the world, and these bases, I mean, for example, CENTCOM is in and AFRICOM are both in Stuttgart, I believe, in Germany. Uh-huh. These are massive command and control headquarters structures where the Pentagon is projecting its power around the world. But there's no part of the world that doesn't come under this. Right. So EUCOM will be most definitely looking at what's happening in Catalonia. They'll be thinking about Spain, and their main aim is to make sure that they maintain their bases. And that's why I think Trump has weighed in here. Because he's taking orders from the Pentagon. Look, we need our bases. Let's make sure that this doesn't happen. We don't want any kind of autonomy for these little countries. Yeah, and so that's another. You're really, really, really sharp. Well done for pointing out that, which I failed to do, that there is a U.S. military interest in this as well. It's not just financial from the centre or control freaks. It's also the U.S. empire, which Britain is really part of.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you for acknowledging that. So we can move on to the Cyril, this new case that has come forward that you wanted to mention that was in I guess the British papers today. Is that right? Yeah,
been on the radio and on the TV.
Uh-huh.
That Cyril Smith, when we had Ted Heath last week, the day after the Conservative Party conference, and I do know a bit about the whole Ted Heath business because I was working in Salisbury where Ted Heath was living in the 1990s for the BBC, and there was a lot of discussion amongst journalists in the city about you know, child abuse in the city, and attempts to investigate and attempts to report to the public what was going on. You know, it's just the way investigative journalism works. It takes a lot of time and effort to get your facts straight and all the ducks in line before you go public on something. And of course, that gives the perpetrators plenty of time to bamboozle and to torpedo your little exercise. So, but with Cyril Smith, I just think it's absolutely appalling. The best person I think on this is a guy called Don Hale. He was actually given by Barbara Castle a whole dossier which police had given to her about Cyril Smith, and then he was visited by special branch and by MI5, and basically told he wasn't allowed to use any of this, and they were threatening to jail him if he so much as mentioned anything about it. So I think we have to be absolutely crystal clear here that the police have been a part of the cover-up, and I think many people know that, but we need to nail these coppers who've been involved in this, because some of them have been good. They've been trying to do the investigation, but as they get close to indicting someone like Cyril Smith, that what they're told then is that, oh dear, the Director of Public Prosecutions doesn't think that there's a likely case. I think I'm trying to remember the actual expression, that a reasonable chance of a conviction. That's right. And so they just pull all that hard work that police have put in over months and months, and maybe even years altogether of man hours, is thrown away. And in fact, they've even said now that the files that they had on Cyril Smith, apparently the Director of Public Prosecutions have lost those files too. There were requests also made by journalists to the Director of Public Prosecutions office about, do you have these files on Cyril Smith? They denied it. They lied. They simply lie. And so the police have been, but mainly really I think the higher up police and the security services. And this was exactly the same case. This is one of the reasons I listened to this story and I thought, gosh, this is what was happening to us in Salisbury, because I mean, it was what it was. Let me just, if I can just detail what we knew at the time, which I actually got the sack a couple of months after this. So we were looking into it. We were just getting some stuff prepared, and I suddenly get told, right, you can't work at the BBC anymore, Tony. We're not going to renew your contract. We've run out of money. Bye bye. And what had happened, I think, I mean, you know, it's difficult to know for sure, but someone had got wind somewhere. I was actually told by the management at Wiltshire Sound, which I was working for, BBC Wiltshire Sound, when we first started discussing this with the BBC people, who were our bosses up in Swindon, that I was told, well, the police have looked into this, Tony, and they found nothing.
Well, yeah.
So there's nothing to see here, nothing to see here. Now, that's it's kind of understandable that someone would say that, but in a way, I suppose that could be a kind of backhanded compliment. They could be saying, well, maybe the police aren't to be trusted on this. And I think it's quite clear. There were many people went to the police at the time in Wiltshire about child abuse in the city, which was going on actually in the same way as in many other places, Rochdale and elsewhere, which was at care homes. Okay, so these were government care homes, not all owned by the government, but certainly kids were placed there, some taken away forcibly from their families and put in there. But then those kids were being basically pimped out by people working at the care home. Incredible. And of course, Ted Heath is in the same city. So it's possible that some of them were to him. Now, I did interview a guy called Bill Woodhouse a couple of years ago who knew Ted Heath through the sailing world, and he absolutely confirmed that he had a real interest in young boys. He said, you quite often when a young boy came into the room, Ted's face would light up. You know, it's obviously something quite unhealthy. He was supposed to be asexual. That's nonsense. Of course, he wasn't asexual. But one thing Bill did say is he said he didn't really think that Ted had a interest in underage boys. So we're not really talking about paedophilia. What we're talking about is child sexual abuse. So that is with boys over about the age of 11. You know, so I think
but wait 1 second, Tony, because I want to back you up a little. I understand you understand, you know, and you may be very knowledgeable about the history here, but I know that the listeners are going to be a bit confused. So you're jumping around a bit, and what I'd wanted to do is zero in on this new news that came out about Cyril Smith. I see that he was at least offered knighthood by the Queen, or not by Thatcher, actually, many years ago. At that time, there were allegations coming forward. Those seem to have been buried since then. Can you explain why suddenly the focus is on Cyril Smith? What's the new information?
Well, the newest information that's come out today is that MI5 and the prosecution, the Office of Public Prosecutions, lied to the press about the Cyril Smith case. This is now quite clear, and of course, that's only actually come out today. I mean, it might sound like we all thought they would, yes, but that's actually only come out today. It's quite clear they've admitted that they lied. when they were asked questions about Cyril Smith, they said, oh no, there is no prosecution, there is no case. It's now found that there was, and that there is.
Now, Cyril Smith is not alive to defend himself, correct? He's died in 2010, according to this Guardian article. I think it's the Guardian. Yes.
Yeah. What the Guardian is saying, that he knew the prosecutors lied to the press about Cyril Smith case. MI5 knew. And so there was a decision not to press charges. It's pretty clear, isn't it? We can see a pattern emerging across the country. The reason I'm bringing in Ted Heath is because this is just last week. He was a Conservative Prime Minister. The report was delayed until the day after the Tory party conference, rather cynically, by Wiltshire Police. But it's quite clear you've got collusion going on between the police at the time and these high-profile child abusers. And also, it does seem that the present inquiry is doing absolutely nothing really to get to the truth, even though they're supposed to be taking evidence in Rochdale about Cyril Smith. We've got present day abusers, and I think it seems to be as if people seem to be dwelling on those who have died. And I think it's much more important to move the Director of Public Prosecutions or whoever to do that. But there's no evidence that Alexis Jay, who's running this national inquiry, is going to do that. You look at the previous report that she did up in, I think it was in, was it Rotherham? Yeah. And there was nobody from the public services, that is to say police or social services, who was prosecuted. None of the people who've been involved in this abuse over many, many years were sent to jail, even put on trial. So I think that's why she's been chosen to run this major national inquiry, is because she's got a track record of not prosecuting the people responsible. And it's so cynical to put someone like that in charge.
Well, this is absolutely, and this is a par for the course, I'm afraid. I do want to ask you, however, though, this all pointing to what you said, a child care facility or facilities in Rockdale, I believe it is, and other places. In other words, what we've got here is every evidence of what we call institutionalized pedophilia, institutionalized, sexual abuse of young people, and this kind of thing. In other words, it is already part of the system, and this is the thing that has to be attacked, I think.
No, I totally agree. Yeah. And of course, it's just an establishment cover-up. The other thing to say about my experience in Salisbury, I mean, this is directly, I was working there in 1992, was that the people who owned the care homes were Tories. They were the guy was the deputy leader of the Conservative group on Salisbury District Council. And
is that significant? I mean, is their political affiliation a reflection of their sexual proclivities? I mean, is that what you're linking?
No. I think the main purpose of this child sexual abuse, establishment child sexual abuse, is not anything really to do with people's sexual preferences. It's actually to do with blackmail. So that's the major purpose of it, I believe, is to bring people in through this kind of treadmill of child sex abuse, get photographs of them, get evidence of them, send them up through the political system up to the top. And that means that you can just easily manipulate them. Now, this is effectively a kind of simple organised crime tactic that's been going on for years.
Yes.
Is get a bit of dirt on a senior public official, and then you can get them to do what you want. It might be a police chief. It might be a major senior detective. It might be the mayor of some big American city or wherever. But this is what organised crime have been doing for ages. And I think that's why it's so disturbing. This has been going on within the British state, and I think they've got to deal with it. And Alexis Jay is just not the person to do it. I mean, if I had been abused myself, thank God I wasn't personally, I would not want to talk to her, because I know that she is not going to nail and not going to prosecute the people who are responsible for the abuse. So, it's a quite, I think, cynical move to put someone like her in charge. And it's just a more abuse, a bit like Grenfell Tower. Kerry. That was horrific enough, isn't it? The people down there, they talk about Grenfell Tower as the atrocity, right? Sure. It's not a tragedy. It was something which was done to us, done to them, an atrocity. And then what does the government do? It puts in charge of the inquiry some judge, I mean, and what he's known for is for making decisions, but for supporting Kensington and Chelsea or other councils to kick people out from London and put them out in Milton Keynes. So if somebody is the council tenant, and the council wants to, they can say, right, we don't want you living here anymore. We've found a place for you in Milton Keynes. Goodbye, off you go. And the Grenfell Tower survivors have got to sit and listen to some guy like that doing their inquiry. It's a continued abuse of the public. And what I'd like to see is the London press and others really take them to pieces for that, because it's just a kind of continuation of their original abuse.
Incredible. All right, with our limited time, unless you have more on this subject, maybe we could go to the next subject. You did want to talk, I think, about YouTube and Google censorship.
Yeah, Google censorship. I think, I've been interviewing, and you might like to as well yourself, Kerry, this guy, Michael Tyler. He's a lovely fella. He lives on a canal boat over in Northampton. And he's done what none of the mainstream press anywhere else in the world have done. And he's got together a list of dead bankers. The people who've been suicided or found dead or whatever in all sorts of weird circumstances over the last 3 years. He's got a list of 80, and he's got links on his website, michaeltyler.co.uk, to some fascinating tales in the mainstream press about each of these, well, most of them. He's got details about the way they're supposed to have died. Now, it's also interesting that what he's done is he's done a bit of analysis of which countries and which banks these people are from. So I'm going to do to you what he did to me. See if you can guess which of the three main banks that these bankers, 80 bankers, have died from.
Oh, well, JP Morgan.
Yes, number one.
Yeah. Barclays, I don't know.
No?
Let's see. God, I don't know. My mind's a blank at the moment. The rest.
All right, but anyway, the other two are Deutsche Bank.
Right.
And UBS, Switzerland.
Absolutely. Okay.
Okay, so those three banks, I'm not saying all 80 are from them, the majority of those 80 are from those three banks. And I mean, one of the examples, for example, is some guy, poor banker guy, who's found dead in a bath full of, he's been filled full of nails from a nail gun. And that is supposed to be suicide. Now, the thing that links all of these attacks is that there is no investigation. So you look at the attack, it looks to me, anyone on the surface would say someone's murdered him, and yet the police arrive on the scene and they go, no, this is suicide. Yeah, so that's the thing that links the attack, which is pretty shocking. Anyway, what Google have done in their wisdom, don't be evil, I think has gone out of the window a few years ago, is to delist some of his pages from their index. So if you type for the exact page, at least this was the case 2 weeks ago, exact thing, which is the title of his page, Google says, sorry, nothing found.
Yep.
And also some of the images from his website. Now, this is just a guy.
I'm actually putting an image. I'm putting an image right now from his website. He's saying he's been censored. So go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, so if you think about what this is, a guy on a canal boat in Nottingham who's actually doing what the BBC should be doing, what ITV, Channel 4 should be doing, and all the major NBC, CBS, CNN, all the rest of them saying, what on earth is going on? The money system, we all rely on it, and yet people are being bumped off right across the major banks, and there's no investigative documentary. Why not? And not only that, I think what this does show us is that we could be approaching something pretty serious. If Google are prepared to censor just some little guy like this, who's no harm to anybody, then that means that they're frightened of this information getting out, and they're starting to use Google to try and totally control the internet. So we need to boycott Google search. And we were saying the same on Tim Black's show in Washington the other day. He was suggesting it as well. I think anybody with half a brain cell knows, don't use Google search. Use almost anything else. There's lots of other searches out there, not Bing, by the way, because they're just as bad. And even web crawler, which is one of the ones I first started using back in the 1990s, is better than Google search now, because the key stuff you need to know, exactly the same tactic as the mainstream press uses, the key things we need to know are the things they'll never tell us. And Google has now gone down that road. which is pretty scary. Also, of course, demonetization of YouTube is killing off an income that many people have got online. For example, Luke, We Are Change, who's been interviewing Kissinger, sticking a camera in his face, etc. He's been demonetized, largely demonetized. Loads of other people. So Google and YouTube, which is one company, and Eric Schmidt need to be take a good look in the mirror and say, look, do we really want to lose our loyalty? I would say the only reason for them to even think like that is they're being lent on by the military industrial complex, who of course pay a lot of money to them. I mean, we had evidence that the NSA had been paying these big US tech giants. So they are looking at where's the money coming from. It's not coming from the users because they use our services for free. It's coming from the military. So I think it's probably better that we censor the sites that they want us to censor. And they're really just becoming another tentacle of the war machine.
Right. Well, I can tell you that I have been censored just in terms of demonetizing. If I do a show on false flags, and this is true, I think, now of everybody. And of course, we have a major false flag right now, right? So it's kind of a case in point. But a lot of these Vegas videos that are showing, you know, great analysis, et cetera, and revealing very important facts to the people have been basically taken off YouTube. And some, I'm sure, are being demonetized. I know that my interviews on false flags in the past with Ole Damagard and Jim Fetzer and others have been demonetized. And there are other things on Camelot that are demonetized. In other words, we cannot put ads on them to make money in order to keep us alive. So when I get into an area which they think they can censor, then they leap on it. You know, it's interesting, just an FYI for you, Tony, that if I cover something that they consider not to exist, such as aliens or secret space, they can't, you know, in all good conscience, demonetize me or take it down, because they would be revealing the fact that it was real. So this is the kind of thing where Gary McKinnon, he reported on the ship-to-ship transfers and the non-terrestrial officers, where his trial never addressed what he actually found. You see, the whole trial was shifted on to an Asperger's defense. And this is another kind of misdirect, where the actual information that I deal with, just FYI, they can't actually attack it, at least so far, because they pretend that it doesn't exist. It's just not real. So it is interesting. But anything to do with false flags, they do consider real, and anything to do with false terrorism, which is, you know, all the terrorism we see and hear about is all state sponsored, basically. And so this is something they will go out and censor. Just worth knowing.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear. I mean, what Michael's done on his website, michaeltyler.co.uk. I hope you don't mind me plugging him. But what he's done is he's gone down there and he's listed a whole load of people who've been demonetized. And he's saying, well, actually, some of these people are just having a laugh. You know, they're making money through cheering people up because the mainstream media is so boring. The comedy is so wooden. You know, actually, you do get some on BBC Radio, has to be said, which is quite funny. The television is hopeless. Yes, I mean, these people are useless. So anyone that's out there actually giving people a bit of a lift, you know, they're demonetizing them too. You know, so there's something sinister, definitely sinister going on here. Yes. And I think we just need to, you know, Google needs to have a good old look at itself. I went up to the Google headquarters in London a few months ago, actually, and I found it a very strange experience. That, okay, so there were a lot of people who were doing cookery programs. I was there because on politics stuff, I actually got quite a lot of subscribers on my channels. But I found the attitude of the security almost military. I mean, I don't know if they're actually ex-military in the security. As people were wandering out, some guy, you know, demanded my pass, and he was just like really aggressive, grabbed hold of my arm. Like,
wow.
What's this about, you know? And I said, I'm just in there, and you know, it's like, yeah, but you're not allowed here, you know. And I'm thinking, hang on a minute, this isn't quite so fluffy and friendly as Google likes to portray. I think what they've done is they brought in a load of people who are ex-military, you know, from psychological warfare. That is to say, you know, I think it's called gosh, is it Team Brigade 77 in Britain, which is people who've been trained in psychological warfare up in Bedfordshire at Chicksands, and in Israel too. They've got this thing over there called Unit 8200, which is a bit like Britain's GCHQ, and they're churning these people out, graduates through the military, and then what they do is kind of send them out into the commercial world in order to, spy, really. That's what this software, a lot of it is used for, is they want to get, I don't know if you've come across this whole idea of the kill switch. What they want is every country now, the cyber warriors want to be able to take out any other country's infrastructure using cyber warfare. That is to say, the electricity. So if you're putting smart meters in your home, what you're doing is you're basically saying to a foreign power, you can shut off my electricity, or you can make me pay 3, 4, 5 times more than I'm actually getting in electricity. So you can hack into my world. And this is something that governments have just completely ignored. What it means is that, a whole country's infrastructure, telecommunications, electrical grid, gas grid, transport, rail transport, road transport, all of that can be hacked into. You might say, well, how can you hack into road transport? You hack into cars. This is a very simple thing to do. You hack into lorries. And so there's a whole world out there which isn't really being looked at. And going back to what I was saying about the banker deaths and Michael Tyler's stuff is really important. Look who has been the chairman up until very recently. Who is the chairman of the BBC? A woman called Rona Fairhead. And Rona Fairhead was the chair of the risk committee of HSBC whilst she was chairman of the BBC. So then there's no way that the BBC are going to be doing documentaries on HSBC's criminality while she's in charge.
Right. Yes, absolutely.
And let's hope, all I say in terms of hope is that let's hope that there is some kind of ousting of Theresa May, who, by the way, is appalling. She's the, and what the Tory insiders have told me is she is the person that the security services wanted to be Prime Minister, not the Conservative Party members, the security services. And so let's hope she's out of the way as soon as possible.
Right. Well, it's probably a bit more confusing than that, I'm afraid. But I do see the news going around of people are saying that they're going to put what is the head of the other party up? They think he's
Corbyn.
going to, Corbyn. They think he's they're going to put him forward, but I can't see it actually.
Well, I don't think there's going to be a general election for a few years. No,
Right.
So I think that's pretty. It's become pretty clear that the Conservatives are going to try and stay in. But whoever takes over her will be quite important to see because they've got to steer this Brexit thing through.
Right. Exactly.
And, they're getting the 1,000-yard stare from Donald Tusk. I'll do an impression of that 1,000-yard stare of Donald Tusk. He's not going to negotiate anything, and everything they come to him and suggest, he's going to turn it down. And you know what? I learned this phrase from Vladimir Putin. And one of the things that Putin says is that, well, we would love to negotiate with America over Syria, but they're not deal ready. Great expression, because what he's saying there, and I think the same thing David Davis is thinking in his mind. Maybe he's not using Putin's words, but he's when he goes to see Donald Tusk or whoever it is, is it Barnier or something? Then he goes to see them. These people don't want a deal. They just want to punish Britain in every single way, and they are livid. They are control freaks who are completely angry and livid that Britain has decided that they want to get out of this cabal. And cartel, because that's effectively what it is.
Let me say that I think there are ulterior motives based on sort of my witness background information that has motivated the Brexit at this time, and that a lot of it, I believe, has to do with the financial sort of downturn or hit. And I believe Vegas is part of that scenario. In other words, what we're seeing is a changeover in the whole financial system worldwide, and I think Britain wants to be independent when that happens, because Europe is going to be
that's
hit
what we're
very
talking about.
hard.
We're talking about. We had a bailout in 2008, a 600 or 700 billion pounds was spent in Britain alone trying to prop these banks up, and there should have been a crash, but there wasn't. Now the real crash is coming. You know, sorry folks, but capitalism died in 2008. It's being kept on life support by this quantitative easing, and at some point it's just all going to collapse. We've started to see house prices in Britain go down as well recently, although apparently I think it's just in London. Other parts of the country are just about level. But you know, what we're seeing, I think, is a complete meltdown in confidence that the European Union, that Brussels can actually run anything. They're looking at Greece, they're looking at Portugal, they're looking at Spain.
Right.
They're thinking, see, this is an oligarchy. And there is, I think the Brits have been quite brave in a way to vote out and say, in a way, it's a sort of similar thing that we did by actually starting, because Britain started the Second World War in 1939. We declared war on Germany. They didn't declare war on us. We declared war on them. Later, actually tricked Hitler into declaring war on the United States because they knew that Congress wouldn't pass if Roosevelt wanted to declare war on Germany. They wouldn't succeed. So,
well, my evidence tells me that Hitler was put into power in the first place by probably a group of Brits and Americans anyway, and then he basically did what Saddam did, which is go off the reservation, and so then they wanted to do away with him. I mean, it's a typical syndrome. It's been going on forever.
Yeah, I mean, he was their kind of mob boss in Germany, and he did looting. He basically looted the whole of Europe, all of the central banks, all of the art treasures, and everything. Brought them back to Berlin, and then once D-Day had happened, so they brought in this Operation Land of Fire, Tierra del Fuego, which was to secrete all this stuff all around the world, getting ready for the Fourth Reich. And Bormann was very much involved in that. He had very close links to Winston Churchill's private secretary, Desmond Morton, but that's another story.
Yeah,
Kerry.
and that is OPJB, which is a great book. Listen, I want to, before you go, I want to ask you, because you had Israel on your list of topics. We haven't gone there yet. What did you want to say about that?
Well, it's just that we did a bit of an investigation into this thing called Unit 8200 in Israel.
All right.
And also something called the Talpiot program, TALPIOT, which I think is absolutely fascinating. And the context of it, I mentioned Abby Martin earlier on. Her report last week, a Vox Pop from Jerusalem, was pretty shocking to hear the sorts of, I mean, it's interesting, you know, this is what we don't see on the press here. The incredibly bigoted and racist attitudes of some of these, most actually of the Israelis she spoke to, of all ages, older and younger, saying things like that there was nothing there. This was a wasteland before the Jews turned up. Also that you know, this whole thing of racial superiority, that we want to, is saying things like, you know, there's only one solution to the Israel-Palestine conflict. One guy was saying we should just carpet bomb them. Another one was saying, well, what we should do is just get all of the Arabs, kick all the Arabs out of Israel, let them form their own country. They can shoot a rocket at us, and then we can nuke them. You know, this kind of appalling. The thing is that there is a thread of real horror in all of this, and that is that part of the, I suppose you'd call it heresy, this whole thing of, you know, we are God's chosen people, we are absolutely wonderful, you know, we can do no wrong, is that there's a mentality involved in all that, which means that they don't believe that peace is possible. Yeah, so this is a belief in the minds of many, many Israelis. We don't believe it's possible to have peace. And in a way, Kerry, that's a self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it?
Okay, well, but what I wanted to know is what specific, was there something in the news that's prompting this, you know, on your part, you know, just not random information?
No, it was all sparked off really by, well, I don't think it's totally random. It's just me putting two and two together, I suppose. And it was all sparked off by this brilliant Vox Pop Abby Martin did on Telly Sur English, which we had a great discussion about. And of course, there are all sorts of really good commentators on this, like Gilad Atzmon, who's the musician who lives in the UK, who's brilliant on the whole sort of thing of Jewish identity. And I just think, you know, we need to kind of get this stuff out there, particularly the high tech and the Israeli GCHQ. I mean, I've spoken to people who are supposed to know about such things, you know, serious high-level people, and they've never even heard of Unit 8200. And yet this is the machine that's driving the Israeli, in fact, they are brilliant, high-tech people. I absolutely hand it to them. They're some of the best technicians in the world, but behind it is this, you know, racist mentality.
Well,
and
that may be the case. However, there is an infiltration. If you listen to Michael Sherman, who, you know, he wrote a book which is called Spy Catcher, not Spy Catcher, I'm sorry, Spy Hunter. I always get those titles mixed up. Michael Shrimpton, yes, I'm sorry. And really about the infiltration of the Mossad by German intelligence. So it's important to kind of realize that you're also talking about there is no clear line, I don't think, anymore between the United States government, the British government, Israel, and Germany. You know, there is infiltration. I would say
slightly. Maybe I've got it wrong. Maybe they're sort of covertly in there. But I think
intelligence, yes, in terms of intelligence agencies.
I would go along with the Saker's analysis on this. He talks about it as the Anglo-Zionist Empire. So really talking about the English-speaking union. You know,
right.
We've got across the Atlantic, the so-called special relationship, which actually, you know, is a lot of it nowadays is between journalists and bloggers on both sides of the Atlantic, rather than anything else. You know, that's the real special relationship.
No, I'm not so sure about that, but okay.
And Israel, you know, so that I think is the heart. And one of the reasons I say that is because obviously Britain did create, you know, the Balfour Declaration and all that. We created Israel. And there's a very strong belief within Freemasonry in the whole Zionist project. You know, so having talked to Freemasons, a lot of them are very similar-minded, anti-Arab, etc., to those Israelis that Abby Martin was talking to in Jerusalem last week.
Right. Well, it's such a complex subject to go down that road at this exact moment is not. We're not going to get. You know, we're not going to get enough traction, I'm afraid. But it's worth noting. I just want to make sure it's a balanced discussion, is all. So thank you for that. Is there anything else that we haven't touched on? I know your time is limited, so let's see if there is anything else that you wanted to cover before we let you go.
No, I think that's it. We pretty much covered everything there. It's just, I mean, the reason I know you might think, well, why is he banging on about Israel? I just think, you know, what we've done by creating, and we're looking at this in a big time scale. The Brits created America, John Cabot and all that stuff, right? You know, it was the Spanish in South America, and that wasn't quite so horrendous as the US has turned out to be with the Pentagon and all that. Great to have all that wealth and all that wonderful stuff. But hang on a minute, we've now got this country that's trying to rule the world, you know, and the Brits created it, but we also created Israel in the other direction. So we've got a kind of, I think we've really got and the other thing is Max Kaiser and others have said when they've worked for the BBC, they have been told, don't talk about Israel. It's completely taboo to do any of this analysis in the mainstream press, basically in Britain. It's almost, and of course Freemasonry goes without saying.
Well, it's also taboo in the United States. I mean, there's a huge Israeli lobby. We know of that. But there is a lot, you know, from my point of view, there's a lot of, I guess, collusion between these governments and certainly, you know, the Rothschilds and the whole 9 yards. So, you know, and then you have to get into the Anunnaki and their link up with Israel. And maybe that is why some people are targeting that particular area of the world. But it's much more complex than that. And again, you know, thinking that rather than have that discussion, we're going to not be able to do justice to it. I appreciate what you're saying, however, and it is interesting, back channel discussions where journalists fear to tread nowadays. There are so many areas, I think, that journalists are simply told are off limits. And, you know, look at the oil cartels, for that matter, you know, to say nothing of the triad, you know, I mean, you know, China, what's going on there? You know, there is the underworld of what's really on the surface, what is talked about. You know, I'm sorry, but the politics that we witness on vis-a-vis the news, television news, you know, journalism, mainstream journalism. I mean, there is one false flag happens and an alternative goes on it like white on rice, which is great on a certain level, but there are so many other topics that are going up, overlooked. And there's also a big picture analysis that never happens. So that's, my rant for the day. Any parting comments on your part?
Well, all I'd like to say is I think we as independent, thank God I haven't got anyone looking over my shoulder telling me what to do. So we really do need to stick together, I think, and we need to big each other up, even if it just means putting links to each other, especially under this appalling attack by the tech giants, Google and YouTube particularly. I think we need to just be pushing ourselves and recognizing that we are actually a force to be reckoned with, because if they try another biggie like 9/11, we're going to be right onto it immediately. And yes. I think that's the message to leave people with, is anything like Las Vegas that happens, we'll get straight on it. We'll spend a couple of hours online and then we'll be absolutely marvelous at collaborating, and it won't take us 10 years to get to the bottom of it. It'll take us 10 minutes.
Exactly. Well, that's indeed exactly what's happened here with the Las Vegas situation. The evidence is just proliferating that this was a false flag, what we call a false flag. That doesn't mean people didn't die. I mean, some people get this confused in their head. They don't understand what is really meant by the word false flag. So that's an important distinction to be made. But nonetheless, there are a lot of fake information going out there. You've got a fall guy, the lone gunman, this nonsense that gets pushed out by the mainstream. It's
one of the things maybe we ought to mention is what was the purpose of it? People will say, well, why would Paddock is a patsy? Yes. What was the purpose? The purpose is an attack on Trump, Kerry. I think that's quite clear. Is the people who are the country music fans are the kind of Trump supporter types, machine gunned. Then you've also got an attack on him in other ways, through the FBI. I think it seems to me, is what this is about, gun control. Well, that's true. Attack on Trump as well. So yes. That seems to me to be the purpose of this. Who benefits? It's the people who want gun control. It's the FBI themselves. And that's why I think, I said mafia should give statements. The FBI should be questioned by the local police as well, because what you've got there is you've got an interest. The FBI's interest is in gun control. They want to be the guys with the guns. They don't want everyone out there to have the guns. They want to have them. And so there's immediately a motive there for the FBI to have a hand in this and then to keep it quiet.
Right. Well, I do want to give credit to Jim Stone. For those of you interested, go to Jim Stone's website. I actually don't know the URL, but if you just do a search under Jim Stone, you'll find him. He was the first person to talk about the link with the FBI, and that the FBI may indeed be behind some of this, a certain portion of the FBI understanding that these intelligence agencies.
We've got a similar situation with MI5. That's our equivalent here in the UK.
Right.
And what we've seen is with the 7/7 London bombings, they were all over the guys beforehand. With the 3 recent attacks in London before the general election, that's at London Bridge, in Westminster Bridge and Manchester, every single occasion, the ringleaders were under surveillance by MI5. They've been reported to the MI5 anti-terror hotline. So we've got a pattern emerging here of people who are basically terrorists, who are either encouraged or allowed to get on with what they want to do and what they call it is budget building, isn't it? More terrorist attacks, we're going to get more money. After the Cold War, they were looking for a threat. They found Islamic terrorism, and of course, it serves foreign policy interests of Israel too, to disrupt the Middle East, to have all these kind of invasions, Afghanistan, to get around the back of the Russians. There's a whole lot of foreign policy objectives tied in with this, I think, Kerry.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you again, Tony, for coming on the show.
Cheers. It's nearly finished my drink now. This is just a bit of grapefruit juice.
Okay.
But anyway,
all right. All right. So take care. I'm on my way. I want to thank you very much, Tony. I'm on my way back to the U.S. We'll check in with you again in the near future. Okay.
All right. Lots of love, Kerry, and lots of love to all your listeners and viewers as well.
All right. Thank you so much. Take care. All right. So that's Tony Gosling, and we have some other interviews with him. Encourage you to take a look at those on my YouTube channel. Just do a search under his last name, Gosling, easy enough to find. So just want to say that it's great to be back. We're investigating the Vegas situation. Please do see my articles with numerous links. I'm also joining up some Illuminati symbolism behind the scene. There are some interesting parallels with Manchester that happened in England, also at a concert, and very strange link up in terms of Mandalay and Manchester, and then the word Manchurian. And apparently there's also a link up with a Manchester and is called a Manchurian or something. So there's something, you know, these clues are also in the layout of the evidence and information. I'm going to try to do a show, as I mentioned, going to try to bring on some investigators. I have put invitations out, so we'll see how that materializes, and stay tuned to Project Camelot for more. So thank you very much. Have a great night. Take care. Bye-bye.